Welcome to Deep Dive into Business Acquisitions with Morgan Knox and Marvin Salcido. This session is a special recording from the Conquer Summit that we had back in January for our Conquer Coaching Program members, and it was packed with valuable insights from top coaches who are also owners of home service businesses, just like you are. Join Morgan and Marvin for a comprehensive exploration of diversification strategies, efficient implementation of systems, and various acquisition approaches. They answer hard-hitting audience questions on operational integration, valuation, negotiation, and leveraging human resources as assets. Check it out now.
All right, guys, we're going to hop on into it. I know this session has been billed as a deep dive into mergers and acquisitions. I'm sorry to start this off with a load of disappointment for all of you. We are not going to have time for a deep dive in 45 minutes. It's probably about 3 days worth of content at least. I did hear Brandon Vaughn tease that he might be planning something like a deep dive workshop summit event at some point for these topics. But Coach Marvin and I have done this talk a few times, and we were thinking that the most efficient way to approach this for our 45-minute time together is just going to be open Q&A. And we have some really awesome other coaches in here that have a broad range of experience that we could tap in for some of these questions. So honestly, we just want to open the floor and start with you guys. If you guys want to raise a hand, we'll run mics and we'll talk through it with you guys as much time as we have, right?
There you go.
Good?
I can start.
Let's do it.
I'm in the process of buying a company. The guy rents from me currently, but he's valuing his company at 3x of what I think it's worth. He does a little over 1.5 revenue, generator company. He's mid-60s, and he's just trying to get out of business and retire. His financials look good. Everything matches. His net is about 150 after his COGS and expenses. So his net is 150. That's with his salary and a lot of discretionary income towards him. I haven't taken the discretionary income out yet. So that's 150 before taking all that out. And my question is, how do I value his company, being that he doesn't really have any branding, he doesn't have any SOPs, no employees or one employee, and so how do I value a company?
He only has one employee.
Yep.
Do you know how long the employee has been with them, out of curiosity?
Like 2 years.
Okay. Marvin,
So let me start off first by saying, you said he's overvaluing the business. In your opinion, and that's fine, that's fair. I'll tell you this, in a lot of my negotiations, I break a lot of hearts. I have to educate most of the people whenever I'm going to look at buying their business as to what the reality of what their business is worth. I know growing up, I was always told that, my business is worth 3 times revenue. Or some sort of multiple like that. Well, that's just not reality in most cases. It can be worth 3 times a multiple, but that's going to be multiple of EBITDA or net profit. And there's factors that you want to look at with his business. You said, did you say that the 150 included his salary or did not include his salary?
Does not include his salary.
Okay, so that's good. So that's accounted into the business expenses. And by generator company, what do you mean by that?
Those big generators.
They install them?
They install and service them.
Oh, okay.
So every generator he installs, it comes with a contract, or this company pretty much sells a
maintenance
contract for 1 to 2 years, but it's no repeat business, so it's like a one-off job, and so I don't have any future income that I'm guaranteed unless he's the business.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in my experience, most one-off businesses like that in the service industry are going to be worth somewhere around 2.5 times multiple, somewhere in that neighborhood. So basically 2.5 times net profit plus whatever stock he has. I mean, any inventory.
Or assets, yeah.
Assets.
Hard assets.
So trucks, any generator sitting in the warehouse. I mean, so basically you're looking at 354, 425, 450,000 plus some assets. So maybe $500,000-ish.
Yeah.
In my opinion, and that is very high level without looking at the books, without anything, it's probably going to be worth somewhere in that neighborhood. How much is he asking?
$1 million.
Yeah, that's like a five or 6x. So that's one of the number one questions that we get whenever we're speaking on M&A. I'm sure you, Marvin, you hear it all the time. But people are really curious about valuation standards and how you arrive at different numbers. And like kind of the long and short story of that is that it depends. It's just a really shitty answer to give you guys. But there are so many factors and variables that go into it. And there's actually a lot of different ways that professionals who specialize in valuations do things. So kind of the explanation that I like to give is a lot of the valuations you guys are probably familiar with are usually done by either brokers or accountants. Most of the time, what that kind of valuation looks like is incredibly high level, in that all they're doing is running some numbers through a software that they have, kind of like a tax planning software, but it's a valuation software, and it pulls from a couple of different methods. One of them's like cash flow projection, the other one's a multiple of revenue or a multiple of EBITDA, and it looks at some industry standards and kind of decides on a range. And normally, you're taking about 3 to 5 years of historical income. So that's one of the big things that you would want to look at is, how much was their growth in recent years? Was there attrition in revenue and profitability and things like that? And it's just kind of a simple calculation that they give. The unfortunate part of that is that when an accountant is doing that, typically they're not looking at a lot of the qualitative pieces of the business that you as an operator, or you as a business investor would be interested in. So those are things like, how many SOPs does he have? How many employees does he have that contain his knowledge base and the technical proficiency to run the business? How much of his revenue is from a handful of clients versus does he have a diversified client portfolio? Because if you only have a handful of clients, that's risky, right? Similar for your vendors. If you have one major vendor relationship and then suddenly they hit supply chain issues, that's big risk for the business, right? So there's a lot of these qualitative pieces that some of these methods of valuing aren't factoring in. Another thing when you guys are exploring buying businesses, especially if you're dealing with brokers or going through brokerages like bizbuysell.com and stuff like that, a lot of the brokers that are listing these businesses are frankly giving the business owners very unrealistic expectations about what they're going to be able to sell their businesses for, because they want to get the listing and they are basically inflating the reasonable expectations there because they are hoping to get some commissions. But the brokers really know that very few of those businesses are going to sell.
The majority of the time that I've looked at a business with a broker involved, I've never been able to successfully negotiate a deal.
Yeah, my husband Justin and I actually had at least one scenario where we sat down and we started to level with the guy about why some of his expectations were not in line with reality, like employees that were being paid off the books and things, and he basically flipped a table and like walked out of the room. So sometimes people just can't hear it. In answer specifically to your question on how to think about this and how to approach it, he's anchored where he is already. Like most people who are selling a business, and you guys will probably experience this when you're in a position to exit your business, it's really hard to be rational about a sale price because you are seeing and feeling all of the blood, sweat, and tear equity that you have put into that business over time. Also, a lot of times when people are nearing retirement, they're thinking about what they need to live on, right? They're thinking about what that retirement dream is, buying the RV, floating around the country, moving to whatever place they want to move. So that's anchoring their expectations. And at the other end of the spectrum is you as an investor, and what's the amount of risk that you're willing to take in some of these industries, based on the specifics of the business. So I would say try to do a really cold, practical evaluation of what's the business going to need from you in terms of investment, how much capital, how much time and bandwidth. That's going to impact what the value is for you in terms of the dollar amount, and how is he expecting you to buy it? So that's the other piece, guys. If they want a leveraged buyout, if they want a loan, they want you to go get an SBA loan or something to buy them out, make sure you're paying attention to the interest that you're going to have on that. That impacts sale price big time. Because
money's expensive right now. And kind of like Morgan said this before, that it's kind of like winning the lottery. If they want all their money up front, if you want it all in one lump sum, I need a discount because I've got to go leverage something and borrow that with interest. And so I need a discount in order to give you your money up front. Mm-hmm. If you'll allow me to pay it out over time, I can give you full price, but
plus some interest for you if you're financing it.
If you're financing it. But I can give you a better deal if you let me pay it out over 10 years versus writing you a check up front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You want to? Yeah, go ahead, Sheena.
Just a big picture strategy for growth if you want to expand your business and looking at acquisitions as a strategy to grow your business, looking at competitors and stuff in the area, is that a good way to look at growing your own area?
Absolutely. I've done actually quite a bit of growth through acquisitions in my own market. Think of it like this. I can spend the money and I can grow organically, and I say organically through advertising and whatnot. It just takes time. And I don't know about y'all. I'm getting older and older every day. I only have so much time on this earth. And I'm kind of like Ricky Bobby in Talladega Nights. I want to move fast. And the way I look at growth through acquisitions is it leapfrogs me forward in the future faster than I can organically. And so if I can buy something for the right price and it's going to leapfrog me forward 3 to 5 years into the future, then why not look at it? But you also don't want to overpay for that. You don't want to just buy that time just because you can. I talked to a guy who was looking at buying a swimming pool company, and the valuation that the guy wanted was absurd. And I asked him, I said, well, what are you getting for this? I think the guy wanted like $400,000 for this business. And I said, so what do you get for this? He said, I get a crappy old beat up pickup, some hand tools, a business name, a website, and a phone number. I said, so you're going to pay $400,000 for a crappy business? I said, if I gave you $400,000 cash, could you repeat building that same exact business within 1 year through advertising? He said, yeah. I said, then don't buy that company. That is a horrible deal. Go recreate it on your own with cash, and you'll far exceed whatever he has built.
Yeah, and to build on that, definitely it can be a really great growth strategy, growth through acquisition. Just like Marvin said, you're buying a business that already has some inertia, right? And we're wanting to build on that inertia and build on that tailwind. Best advice that I can give, though, is do a really critical analysis of what your strengths are as an investor. And that's going to be a lot of your operational know-how, the things that you've learned in the business over time. It might be assets that you have in your business that can be leveraged in another business, like your customer list and their customer list, maybe some great cross-pollination opportunities. You might have some technology or some processes that another business is missing that you can easily leverage. When you identify kind of what your strengths are and also what you're looking to acquire, build a little bit of a profile of what an ideal acquisition might look like for you and try really hard to stick to that. So we want to be as objective as possible whenever you're approaching these different scenarios, because it can be really easy to fall into what we call deal heat, which is that you're so excited at the prospect of an acquisition that you don't want to let this thing go. You already have somebody who's talking to you about it, and you get really, really sucked in. We're all guilty of it.
I've been there.
Yeah, and it's a...
Yeah, so I probably a decade ago, maybe longer, looked at buying an irrigation company in another market where we had some presence there, but it was going to help solve some problems for us. It was going to give us some management staff and stuff like that. And we went through all our due diligence, and I knew that the business was in a decline, but I talked myself into that it was just the owner half retiring. And I never did get the final set of books until the day that we closed. And I knew I should have walked away from the closing table when I looked at the final set of books, because the business in 5 years had went from $800,000 a year in revenue down to $150,000 a year in revenue. And I was paying $250,000 plus inventory for this business. I bought it and it died. I ended up paying over $250,000 for this experience. I shut the business down within 6 months.
It's a big learning experience. So
Very big.
Yeah, and sometimes, it can be easy to get too sucked into you spent 6 months talking and negotiating and exploring this thing, and it can be really hard to walk away from that. But really remember, you guys, that from an investor perspective, you have all of the advantage to play the long game. This gentleman that wants to sell his business for 5 or 6 times an EBITDA multiple, and he's angling for retirement, the reality is that less than 20% of businesses that are listed for sale actually close. So the truth is that he's going to get another year down the line, another 2 years down the line, another 3 years down the line, and he's going to realize that that expectation is not in line with reality, and that dollar point that he's willing to accept is going to start sliding down. Otherwise, the business is basically going to be given a Viking funeral, right? And that's what unfortunately happens with a lot of businesses.
But what I learned in my experience was don't get emotionally bought into the business before you buy it. And I've made a deal with myself now. Anytime I'm emotionally bought into it, I walk away or I just give it time. I sit on it because, like what Morgan was saying, he who's the most patient wins. Yes, sir.
So when you identify a business that you want to buy and you approach the owner, if they're looking to retire and that's you're waiting for them to retire, how do you keep them on board to, learn their systems and everything? So that is it a contract for? Yeah,
it's
5
just a
years?
simple work contract with them. And you can do it for any variation, any amount of time that you deem necessary for you to learn the business. I've done it for as little as 3 months and as long as 3 years and anywhere in between there. I had one guy that after I bought out his company, I realized I didn't really need him around, but I transitioned him into a role where he became a quality control officer for me. And now he's an account manager. But that was 5 years ago, and I still can't get rid of the guy. He's in his 80s, and every year he keeps coming back, and he's like, Marvin, I still want to keep working. And I told him, I said, dude, you have a job here as long as you want to work. He's a great employee. He shows up. He only works part-time. He works 20 hours a week. But he's my eyes out in the field. And I just did a work contract with him, and then he just stayed on.
Make sure you negotiate hard for how much time you need from that person during that transition phase, and make sure that you're going to have their attention. It's going to be smart for you as part of that buyout agreement to probably structure a portion of it as maybe consulting fees for them, or sometimes even contingent upon them staying engaged or a certain amount of performance of the business. Especially if it's a new industry for you, like you're moving horizontally into another industry, that expertise and that skill set that they bring is invaluable. Absolutely. So definitely listen to those red flags if it seems like someone's super burnt out, if they're ready to go, if they're going to drop the business as soon as they have a paycheck, then you want to be really thinking through those things. Yeah. Did you have your hand raised? Yes, I did.
And it's kind of piggybacking off of the same question he had. In my industry, HVAC, in my area, there's a couple of much older gentlemen who are looking to retire and get out of the business, including like my mentor. He does a lot of new construction hotels. Well, I want that business, but he doesn't have these great books that he's keep. He may file taxes, but as far as books on a regular, he doesn't have any scheduling software, but he has a very valuable set of clientele that I would like to acquire. So how would I go about presenting to him, as far as him wanting to segue out of the business and me taking over and getting that clientele?
I'll let Morgan start on this one.
Yeah, that's a really excellent question because it's a super common scenario, right? I think we can all relate to maybe not having perfect financials. When you're approaching an investment scenario like this, you have to realize that if they don't have what we call audit-proof books, which is like a QuickBooks Online, a dedicated accounting software, if they don't have several years of history in that, there's a lot of risk in you taking their word at what the values are, right? And even if they feel like they can pull stuff together from bank statements and they can throw stuff in a spreadsheet, it's questionable. It doesn't mean that you can't get a deal done. So the way that I would typically approach that would be thinking through what their expectations are, what their projections are in terms of what they think the business is doing in net profit and revenue, and structure a deal that mitigates your risk by not locking you in to a solid purchase price out of the gate. So maybe you decide on a foundational price or something that's purely performance based after you take over operations. So there's some of these scenarios. If you guys are curious about Googling a little more about some of these things so you can find out more information, you can look at things like acquisition deal stacks, right? That's what we call these negotiations and the different ways that you can structure a buyout scenario. And one of the most common ones that people favor in a scenario like this, especially if you're trying to move fast and you want to get a deal done, but you don't have perfect information, you can't do a whole bunch of due diligence, is what we call an earn-out agreement. And so what that looks like is you sign the purchase agreement and you acquire that business asset, and over a period of time, you pay them out based on how the business performs. If they're confident in their business as an asset and their performance there, they're hopefully going to be pretty comfortable with something like that, right? And sometimes you'd pay them out, like I've seen 3% of revenue up to a cap, right? So 3% of revenue for a period of years up to a cap, so that you're, mitigating your risk, but that can look really good to them if they feel like the revenue is going to be stable. So it's also a really great way of keeping an owner bought in during a transitionary period, because they want to help guarantee that performance. So that's kind of one of the things that I would encourage you to think about, is you can get very, very creative with these purchase scenarios, and you don't have to lock yourself into a concrete number right out of the gate.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I had a question about specifically, obviously, evaluating a business, but specific to the multiples. So, we talked about the specific multiples. So what are some clear KPIs that you guys are evaluating when trying to figure out, hey, what multiple should this get? So for me, I'm thinking, how many hours a week does that owner have to work in that business in order for it to run? Or maybe it's, net profit. Just what are some, maybe it's trailing revenue for a year. I'm not sure, but what are those clear KPIs that you guys are looking at to say, hey, this is a 1, 2, 3, 4 times multiple?
So I'm going to be looking at 3 to 5 years of income, because I want to see if it's trending up or trending down. Are they profitable? What kind of net profit are they pulling? I want to look at a lot of the intangibles. I want to look at the reputation of the company. I want to look at the company culture. I want to look at the equipment in the company, which those are tangible. Is the equipment old? Is it going to have to be replaced shortly after I take it over? Are the employees paid fairly, or am I going to have to come in and give everybody pay raises right after I take over? I'm going to look at, of course, what kind of time constraints is that going to take on for me as an owner? How difficult, if this is a similar business, or if I'm bringing it in under my umbrella, how difficult is it going to be to merge the businesses with mine? Are our cultures aligned, or do they have a toxic culture and I'm going to have to battle that? And then, oh Lord, what else?
Some of the risk factors that we were talking about earlier. So again, if you guys are going to kind of Google around or look for some additional information on these are what we would call like qualitative valuation factors. Okay, so the things outside of hard numbers. A good one is we were talking about client base, like client revenue. So especially in the commercial space, if more than 20% of your revenue is because of a certain client.
One client.
Or same on the vendor side, if more than 20% of your supply is coming from one vendor, that's a risky scenario for you to be in an acquisition scenario. That would pressure your multiple down a little bit, okay? So like the range on the multiples, like Marvin mentioned earlier, for home service spaces and commercial contracting is usually kind of 2 to 2.5 on the lower or the baseline end, up to 5 or 6, and that's pretty high comparative to what we see. One of the big things to factor in would be recurring revenue is a huge one for pushing multiples up. And then the thing that I would look for is basically, good rule of thumb is how turnkey of an operation is it? When that owner steps out the next day, how much work are you going to have to do? The less work you have to do, the higher the multiple that they garner.
So in this scenario, this gentleman over here, the business is built around that business owner. He's basically a one-man band. He has a helper. But the business 100% revolves around that owner. For me, that devaluates the business. Whereas I bought a company out 3 years ago that the owner was half retired. Like legitimately, it was a $3 million company, and he would show up 1 or 2 days a week. He didn't really do anything in the company. His managers ran everything. He was a figurehead. He showed up, he smiled, he waved, he shook hands and shaked babies and, all that good stuff. So, yeah, I mean, you're going to be looking at, you're going to have to look at the business and completely pull it apart and then put it back together on paper.
One of the most valuable things that you guys can do is go fishing, and just start talking through these scenarios and doing discovery with as many people who are maybe interested in selling to you as possible. Because it's very true that you're not going to close the first deal. You might close 1 out of every 10, and those could be good numbers. But every single time you go through that discovery process, you're going to learn and uncover new things that are going to be relevant to you in the future, that are going to be of interest.
Yeah, I think I worked on 10 different deals last year, and I think I closed 1. And I'm a pretty dang good negotiator.
Thank you for watching Deep Dive into Business Acquisitions. We hope you had valuable takeaways from this comprehensive exploration of diversification strategies, efficient system implementation, and various acquisition approaches in your business endeavors. Again, thank you for joining, and don't forget to swing by the Conquer booth to learn more about how you can become not just a master of your trade, but a confident business owner.